All right, it is May Day, 5/1/2023, Infinite Plane Radio. We are live. Title of the live stream is No Escape from World War Infinite. And this title was inspired by someone who asked me a question about why I even bother cataloging, noticing, deconstructing all of these various deceptions. And at first I didn't know how to answer it because what we're doing here is separate from what you generally consider to be conspiracy theory. We're looking at a bigger picture, I think, than merely a spin on what the mainstream media tells us. And it's a valid question. Why are we looking into this stuff? Why does it matter? And I was a little taken aback by what I saw as apathy. Like, why isn't this an all-encompassing, engrossing interest of yours? You've peeked behind the curtain. You know some things are not what they seem, but is there more if you follow that thread? And I find that many don't follow the thread to its logical conclusion. If the moon landing is faked, then what? And some people don't go all the way. I was always confounded by professional moon landing debunkers who would still believe there's a space station or a secret space program. And I'm thinking, wait, they're lying about this, and you're going to believe them about that, which even has less evidence. And this is a problem of, again, not following through to its conclusion and hitting something of a wall. And I think a lot of people hit walls, or they feel like they hit walls. And I'm thinking maybe they haven't gone far enough. And that's what we do here. The post that I'm referencing on my blog is called Misinformed versus Uninformed versus Informed. The misinformed masses. The uninformed are those who don't pay attention, and those of us who do pay attention are the informed. And I'm suggesting that the answer to his question, what is the point of paying attention to the intricacies, the Psywar itself? Why do we care? I'm saying it has to do with the fact that there is no opt-out. In other words, and his name is You Can Call Me L. I found him on the Fakeologist forums. He said, why should we bother be paying attention? What do the syncs signify? Now, he's not disputing them. He says, quote, I don't dispute the synchronicities. They're interesting as far as they go. But what is it that syncs signify? Do we need to catalog them and curate them? Now, that's an interesting question. And I understand, so it's kind of daunting. You're like, well, what do we do with all of this? At some point, it's almost like, should we just live our lives? And I think that's where he's getting at. He says, are these meaningful signs? The wire mesh, a feedback loop, the noisy echoes of a demented machine, the wonder of God. How do we stand in relation to this? Incurious, apathetic, consciously seeking, consciously discarding, drilling deeper into mysticism. What value have the ramifications provided except for self-referential, self-perpetuating interest? That's his question. A few questions built into it, but for the most part, it's, are we essentially delving into something so deep that, it's almost like, is it even worth it? Does it lead anywhere? And my answer is this: ignorance is not bliss. And the purpose of this, the perpetrators, the ones behind the Psywar, the ones who are creating these massive psychological operations, they would prefer it if we were apathetic, or if we ascribed all the patterns, the predictive programming, to eerie coincidence. Like when the train derailed in Ohio, and it was exactly like the movie White Noise. Most said, oh, that's an eerie coincidence. Well, eerie coincidence means that this was God. This was the simulation theory. This was some kind of artificial intelligence. That's the general explanation there. You're just kind of ascribing it to a higher power. Might as well say God, but anything but man. Man didn't cause it. It's a coincidence caused by something higher. And I'm suggesting that this is a fallacious line of thought, and that if you're ascribing these patterns to something even mystical or having to do with synchronicity, I think you're actually hiding the ones who are doing it, the man behind the curtain, which is where I'm focused. Because I'm suggesting that we are in a psychological war zone being waged by man against man. And all of these patterns are pre-planned narrative hooks built into world stage programming. Predictive programming is part of the mind control infrastructure. It's not a supernatural phenomenon. Again, the Ohio thing. After the Ohio train derailment in Palestine, InfoWars put out a piece and they said, oh, the reason why we have the predictive programming with white noise is revelation of the method. I'm like, what the hell is that? Revelation of the method. This is just lore. This is conspiracy lore that there's dark occultists who have a rule book that says, if you're going to do something wicked, you got to put it on TV first. And if you reveal it to them, then you don't have any karmic retribution for all the bad things you do. Like, again, that's an explanation that requires adding a lot of unverifiables into the equation here. Just a bunch of random statements that you can't really trace. Find me a dark occultist, find me their spell book before you tell me that what we saw on TV was magic, that what we saw on TV was a satanic revelation. No, I'm sorry. Predictive programming is the norm, not the exception. They paid attention to that one, I think, to distract from the fact that it is the norm. The movie White Noise, again, it involved not just predictive programming, but literally the extras in the movie were affected by the real life version of it. Again, if you defer to a supernatural explanation, you're falling into the divine fallacy, God of the gaps. And again, you're not looking for the perps. It'd be like if a bank was robbed and you ascribe it to magic or some kind of time travelers who went to another dimension. I mean, you know, if you're going to go to something supernatural, you're going to miss the mundane. And of course, perpetrators, the conspirators would love it if you blamed aliens for all of their deeds. Oh, it's the aliens did it. The aliens robbed the bank. I'm sorry, it doesn't logically follow to say the dark occultists did the TV programming. And again, it's a distraction. But InfoWars and all the other conspiracy channels that push false flag theory, they live 1 foot in the matrix and 1 foot off. Like, they're not exactly breaking away from mainstream. They're just offering a spin. But their spin is always more dramatic. There's more to the story. I call them MSM plus. Now, to get back to his question, though, my answer, why I pay attention, because I think we're in the theater of Psywar, and I think what's clear to me is that there's no opt-out. Now, there's no intrinsic need to examine your life and seek out information beyond the bland, false explanations you've been given. You can ignore it. However, if you ignore the news media and you say it's all fake, this is all psychological operations, it's all programming, I'm just going to put my head in the sand. If you do that, you're at the same level of ignorance as the misinformed public. And the misinformed public, and I say they're the misinformed and we're the informed, big difference here. But they are accepting news passively, seeing through, understanding, seeing what's going on requires more active engagement than passive media consumption by the complacent masses. But actively ignoring it, putting your head in the sand, going off the grid with media, just turning it off and not paying attention at all, I'm suggesting that's just as disempowering as passive consumption. There's no escape from the perpetual mind war. This is the World War Infinite. It never ends. You can't turn it off. And there's a reason why I'm saying you can't turn it off. One, look at 2020. Look what happens when 99.9% go with the program. Look what it does to your agency, where you can go. And maybe you're still free, but none of your friends are anymore. So it kind of ruins everything. And so the idea that opting into ignorance is some kind of defense, no, it puts you on the other side of the sheep. We're in the know, the sheep are in the fog, and you're on the other side of the sheep, because then when something crazy happens, when they start sending in the aliens or the towers, buildings start falling again, whatever they do, you're not going to have the information to know why it's fake, know what the agenda is. Instead, you'll be wandering around with all the sheeple waiting for answers from above. So we have 3 groups of people. The 3 groups of people are the uninformed, misinformed, and informed. The misinformed are the sheeple. And they are the foot soldiers for every elite agenda. I watched this video this morning of a shepherd crossing a road, and he had a whole lot of sheep with him. And this was posted by Elijah Schaefer. Elijah was one of the live streamers at Kenosha. He got that nickname because he was chewing like pretty hard, like he had some kind of, I don't know, amphetamines or something. But he posted a video of a shepherd, and he said, "Everyone's acting like sheep, I warned." And they said, "Why do you care if they remain sheep?" And his answer, "Because sheep are dumb, and that makes them dangerous." Well, in the video, the sheep trample the shepherd. He starts waving his crook around, and he manages to get up again, and then one of them bowls him over, and he plants into the asphalt face first. Now, this is what I'm talking about. You might not be a sheep, but when the sheep get stampeded, you're going with the sheep. That's kind of why I think it matters. And that's why I'm saying you can't opt out of the Psywar, because the sheeple are the foot soldiers for every elite agenda. Look at how 2020 played out, using fashion to spread their fascist ideology, using this peer pressure to get people to conform. Now, the uninformed are only aware that the misinformed are sheeple, but they don't have any information or insight beyond that to guide them if they're not actively paying attention. Therefore, they're more susceptible to controlled opposition agents and narratives when major events occur. In other words, maybe you never watch the news because you know it's toxic and fake, but then something happens and now you tune in and you're like, oh, Stu Peters can tell me what's going on, or InfoWars can tell me what's going on. Now, this is the third category that I want to get into, is the informed. And those are the ones who know what's going on. They know it's a Psywar. They know it's fake until proven real. They know why they say something's fake. And this is the only position where you can make rational decisions. The other positions take sides in emotional control dialectics that put sheeple at war with sheeple. And another important point here, the misinformed include the mainstream mediated minds, but also alternative news. Like, I would consider anything following controlled opposition agents to be misinformed. They're not informed. They have a lot more information than the normie, but it's coming from a controlled opposition source. So as a rule, all non-auto hoaxing media is misinformation. If they push a false flag, if they're pushing it's a false flag or it was a second shooter, anything that adds on, yeah, I'm sorry, but they're part of the misinformed. Now, the uninformed and the informed know better than to trust the mainstream media. But again, the uninformed will always lack specific information, specific intel, and it leaves them at the mercy of the disinformation agents. That's why Q is so big. You have all kinds of people who've been told, don't trust the news. Well, that's smart. Don't trust the news. But then what do? They instantly go find other sources to trust. And now we have huge cults of people who worship JFK Jr. They think Trump is Christ. These are casualties of the mind war because they were in a position of ignorance and they were easy to exploit. At least we have a clue and a methodology. We have an inside track to world events. Like even now, just the other day, I said, look, the plot twist in the Psywar is that now they're target marketing their shootings to reach the political right who don't care about school shootings, because usually the shooters are right-wing MAGAs with bowl cuts. And these shooters are non-threatening to the right. Well, ever since this last summer, all of the shooters have been non-binary, trans gun persons, liberal Redditor. And now this recent shooting, and this is one that's still an ongoing psyop where it's an illegal immigrant who shot up a home and he's on the loose. Now, what do these things have in common? Leftist shooters, or the shooter comes from across the border. Now the right wing cares about these shootings. And again, I'm just saying, I called it that we're going to see all of these shootings are going to now matter to the right because of how they're going to market these things. And they've been doing it since, and it's pretty obvious that's the direction. And we're going to see more attempts to get the right to say AR-15s are too much power. Now, we may not have all the answers, but we're on the right trajectory because at least we're not following. We're not relying on talking heads that have been put there to catch anybody who sees through the big picture. If you want to opt out of the Psy-War, which is understandable, the only way is seeing through it. And this requires a constant process of active media observation, as opposed to the passive consumption of the misinformed or the willfully ignorant, those who choose to ignore it. Because ignoring it can't get you out of the Psy-War, and paradoxically, it makes you more vulnerable to it. It's primarily an information war that weaponizes ignorance. Therefore, avoiding information is not a defense, it's not a strategy, and it's not an effective anti-Psy-War move. The less you know about it, the more of a pawn you are in its game. I mean, think about what a pawn you might have been before you figured out what you know just so far. I mean, when I was in the military, I believed every weapon of mass destruction was real. I really had no way not to. I was completely insulated. There was no way I could have arrived at any accurate picture of just how the Psy-War works, how this fear-based weaponized superstition works to control the masses. I was not in a position to see it. Going through your comments, Benson says, man using leaf blower shot by neighbor. Yeah, that's one of the main plot twists recently is we have the wrong door shooter. You hit the wrong doorbell, you get shot. Wrong driveway, get shot. Your ball goes into the neighbor's yard, get shot. Go into the wrong car at the gas pumps, get shot. Cheerleaders getting into the wrong car in a parking lot, get shot. Neighbors are mad that their baby can't sleep because their next door neighbor's firing his AR-15, so they knock on his door. They all get shot. And this is engineered. This is a narrative that we have watched as it's been created, as it's emerged. Listen to this headline from the Washington Post. Why are Americans shooting strangers and neighbors? It all goes back to fear. Story by Danielle Paquette, John Hardin, Scott Clement. Again, why are Americans shooting strangers and neighbors? It all goes back to fear. And I'm seeing the phrase Wild West being tossed around quite a lot. Now, remember, these shootings are all fake. We were easily, from the right, you're able to, and the conspiracy theorists are able to look at 20 years of school shootings and say, okay, we can see how this is fake. This is part of the Psy-War. We can ignore this and not include this in our worldview as anything other than an attempt to coerce us out of our right to self-defense. But now that the shooters are all leftists and liberals and Redditors, now they believe it. They're no longer just dismissing it. One of the things I've noticed recently is that these psychological operations are all target marketed. But you can't tell me that it just became the Wild West last week. Like, oh no, it just started. We just now reached a point. It's a crescendo now. Now it's so violent that if you knock on the wrong door, you'll get shot. It wasn't an everyday occurrence until about like a month ago when the PSYOP entertainment complex realized, hey, this is a new strategy that we can use. And that's why I follow. This is what we're actually paying attention to answer that individual's question, why do you pay attention? So we can know what is going on. Not what they tell us what's going on, but what they want us to think. I like to know what the sheeple think. I want to know what the sheeple fear. I want to know if they fear podcasters who promote conspiracy theories. Like, I want to know how weaponized the mob has been turned against, let's say, just free thinkers in general, mind virus spreaders. I like to know where their Karens are at. Like, when are they going to bring out the helmet Karens? You know, I've been talking about this for some time, that when the space junk becomes a regular occurrence, people are going to be wearing helmets to go with their masks and their PPE. And these are all religious garments, looking at it from an anthropological point of view. But even now, like, for example, there's a story out of control rockets and deadly spacecraft could become deadly. Yeah, out of control rockets and spacecraft could become deadly. As scientists warn, there's a 10% chance fallen debris will kill someone within the next decade. You know, there's actually an episode, I believe it's on, it's an Ellen Moore based series. And one of the episodes is called She Was Hit by Space Junk. And I remember this is a thing we've been following because this storyline is something they've been building us up to. That's why I've said we're going to have helmet Karens pretty soon. I've been predicting it more or less based on predictive programming. And that's one of the things. If predictive programming is part of how they roll out their big narratives over the months, years, even generations, if that's what predictive programming does, and we know it does, we've observed it, then you can use it as a predictive model. You want to know what's happening in the future? Watch the movies. In fact, Bill Maher was talking to Elon Musk. I listened to their conversation, and Bill Maher actually said exactly that. He said, everything that happens in the movies happens in real life. And this was just about AI and everything else. And it's like, yeah, he says it to be ironic, but it's actually true. But it's not necessarily true in the sense he imagines. In other words, everything they show us on TV, they're going to pretend into existence later. But here we're being told that out of control rockets are now a threat. And now you got to put your helmet on. And if you don't, you're going to be walking around and some helmet Karen's going to tell you, your helmet protects me. All right, let me go through some comments. And by the way, we're going to be live with Fakeologist in about 40 minutes. So we're going to cut this short at about 10 till, and then we're going to regroup. Erica Creech says, constant vigilance is the price we must pay. Yes, there's no escape from World War Infinite. Ignorance is not bliss. I mean, it might be bliss for short periods of time, but the disempowerment that comes with it will definitely make you susceptible to the mob mind, and whatever the mob does, you do. And what we're doing here is we're creating a mob of our own. They got their hive mind pretty much locked down, but wait till we hive up. And the bigger our hive gets, the more resistant we are. We're actually creating a parallel media, a media of the informed. So we can ignore the noise of the misinformed, the believers versus believers, the sheeple wars, the World War Infinite. We can't escape it, but we can see through it. We can actually step outside of it. But you have to step outside of their controlled dialectics. And that's very difficult for people to do. They get lured into it. And there's a reason why. It's because this is high-tech mind control. Look how they target market every single psyop. Here's an atrocity. We want a reaction out of this group. So this is how we dress up the bad guy. This is what, quote, woke me up. I was watching the news and I saw the shooting in Charleston with the bowl cut Dylan Roof. And I thought, the name Dylan, that's a tie into Littleton. Dylan, the name. And I was like, okay, he looks like one of these shooters. You got Eric Harris, you got Dylan Klebold, and you're like, okay, there's some connection here. They're kind of making these connections. But then I thought about it more and I'm like, wait, these are more than just coincidental connections. Dylan Storm Roof, radicalized on a racist website called The Storm. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized these are engineered bad guys to antagonize whatever group is being targeted for this. So this scares the left, doesn't scare the right. Nick Cruz didn't scare the right because he wore a MAGA hat. And of course, their dialectic here is always polarizing people on, do we blame gun culture or do we blame mental illness? Now, both of these explanations are part of the Psy War, because why are we blaming mental illness or guns for something that didn't actually happen? And moreover, they create this myth of the, quote, mentally ill shooter. Now, that's just a scapegoat, but it matters that the public, the sheeple, the masses who don't know their minds are being mediated, it matters that now they believe that the mentally ill will pop off at any moment and shoot up a place. Because then the media can walk, down the line a few stories and they can say, okay, well, mental illness is actually correlated with right-wing beliefs or going to 4chan or Discord. And they mess with definitions until now mind viruses are a thing. And it's like, wait a minute here. They're getting the public to go along with stuff over the long term. They're walking us into certain conclusions. As I've been pointing out, the plot twist in the Psy War. Now the right cares about shooters because now the shooters are all leftist. Whoever saw this coming? Trans gun persons? The trans manifesto from the Nashville shooter hasn't been released yet because they're afraid it's going to trigger a bunch of copycat shootings. Meaning this person has some kind of a point, I guess, from this perspective. And don't think they won't do it. Anders Breivik, he was the right-wing nationalist who shot the Liberal Party's children at that event. His manifesto was recycled by Brenton Tarrant, who did the same over in Christchurch. They will take these manifestos and have other shooters go do an event, and they'll say, see, these ideas caused it. These ideas radicalized them. These mind viruses made them deadly. And once they make that connection in the mind of the public, it's not that far to say, okay, this guy posted a flat earth meme, we better flag him. And ultimately, this is a war against the perceivers. And that's what you are. Look, if you're not misinformed, or if you're not totally clueless and uninformed, head in the sand, you're a threat to their greater story if you're actually informed about it. The only people that are supposed to be informed are the ones who took the blood oaths, the ones who signed the NDAs, the ones who are part of these blackmail rings, like the one we recently discussed that is at the center of the GOP. The one, I mean, this is crazy when you really think about it. When you look at the characters involved, and if you just, and I'm not doing guilt by association, but I'm just pointing out that you have a provable blackmail circle where an individual has a US representative blackmailed, and that's not the story. No, it's not the story because they're all in on it. And it's not just in politics, it's also in media. It's clearly the case. That's how the pyramid is. Okay, let me continue through your comments. Backward Act says, hi, I want to offer a promotion of your channel, viewers, and followers via chatbots. Dodgehype.com. Yeah, I'm interested, actually. I am. I would like to have a lot of Penguin bots once I have the 24 stream up, so I may look into it. By the way, there's a new balloon scare. People are scared because of balloons now. Again, I think there's another story here. I think that people are just now able to notice things and talk about things. And like there used to be UFO sightings all the time. Well, what were people actually seeing? Obviously, satelloons. If there's a balloon dipping down, it's a satelloon. Satelloons can do all the functions of a supposed orbiting satellite, which makes no sense if you compare it to what a satelloon can do. But anyway, there's been a satelloon sighting. I saw it is at the top of Drudge. So all of the people who are waiting for the alien invasion that they've been conditioned to expect are waiting for it. And this is why it matters. Again, just to answer that person's question again, it matters that we deconstruct the fakeness of it all because the sheeple are going to be conquered by aliens. And we're going to be conquered as well because they've been conquered. You thought being bossed around by collectivist fascists from the WEF was bad. Wait until the aliens arrive. And you don't even believe in them and you have to obey them. Not Shock says you can't opt out of mind war. Your mind is the battlefield. Yeah, exactly. You can't opt out because it's a closed media system where everyone, and this is why what we do is important, I think. We have to have that distinction. What the masses believe or are expected to believe, what the official historical facts are versus what they're telling us. Because no matter what you think, no matter what you know, no matter how much is exposed, the history books are going to reflect the interests of the power elite and their fake news. Like the official story of 9/11, yeah, that's history. And you can't question it now. It's carved in stone. Okay, let's see here. Going through your comments. Fascinating. Again, if you want to join us with Fakeologists later, just make sure you're following at infiniteplane.live. We have the audio feed that is ongoing. Even if the video cuts off, the audio feed stays on. Joined by Sledge, thank you for joining. We are live on all platforms, Twitch, DLive, Odyssey, YouTube, and then the live feeds. We're also live on TuneIn. So if you like the TuneIn app, we have a 24/7 feed there as well. Okay, let's continue. May Day. Again, I talked about this last week. I said, hey, watch, on May Day, we're going to see Beltane fires. Beltane fires is in the occult pagan holiday, but the fires are going to be brought to us through political drama. Because I've noticed every time we have one of these big pagan holidays, there seems to be some kind of political drama where people just happen to be dressed the part. And sure enough, On Les Luther's Twitter feed, posted this morning, he found that we do have protests around the world, and it does seem to have a lot of fire. And I'm looking at this, and I was like, this reminds me of the fire at Disney last week, where the dragon burned. It's like, was that a coincidence? Probably not. It's just the Illuminati burning something for their own occult reasons, and it doesn't matter whether or not you are in the know about it. The Super Bowls are always basically fertility rites. It's Candlemas in bulk, worship of the goddess Bridget or Isis, or in this case, Mystery Babylon. It was a fertility rite. It was a Gnostic Catholic mass. Now, that would sound crazy to the people who just take everything at face value. But anyway, Les Luther has this post here. It's from France, and it has firemen leading the May Day protest. And now they're ostensibly standing in the name of democracy, and they're waving these flares. So you have firemen with torches marching down the street, and the public's like, yay, democracy. No, this is, as Les Luther put it, fire, costumes, theater, pageantry, Beltane. And if you look into the occult holidays, you'll see these patterns. So May 1st is the high point of the calendar. It's the anniversary of the Church of Satan, interestingly. But this is one of the high points, and it's also the International Workers' Day, so it's a communist holiday. So it's kind of convenient that these things run together. But this is one of the 8 Sabbats. You have the cross, the fourfold division of the year, but then there's an additional division. So between the solstices and between the equinoxes, you have these midpoints. ABC airs New York City footage during a Knicks Heats game from 22 years ago. And they didn't even draw attention to it. I mean, this was kind of low key. People are watching the Knicks Heat game, and all of a sudden, you see the Twin Towers in the background behind the Statue of Liberty. This was live. This is on the New York Post. What does it mean? And they mistakenly used footage from 22 years ago during a cutaway during a live game. Now, I think maybe this could relate to another 9/11 coming. Not a coincidence. There are no coincidences on the world stage. Just like if you're watching a movie and something happens that significantly changes the plot and it leads to the resolution, you wouldn't call it a coincidence because you know it was a plot device, that the authors put it there for a reason. And that's how we should look at everything in the media. These are all plot devices. Now, I want to get into the perpetual theater of Psywar, what I'm referring to as World War Infinite. Confucius says the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name, which is actually a hate speech these days. But the theater of Psywar, as I define it, is the subjective world superimposed on the objective one. And this mediated reality is faith-based, feelings-backed, idealistic, and skewed by a subjective and heavily indoctrinated interpretation. This is the worldview that humanity shares, as defined by government media collectively. And it's our de facto religion. And we often talk about this, how it's supplanted and replaced the Old Testament flood narrative with climate change, sin with viruses. You have outer space is the new replacement for heaven. Salvation and transcendence is now digital immortality, and God's going to show up as an AI. We've been discussing how we have been given a new religion. This religion was imposed. We were born into it, but it's the de facto worldview. Now, properly defining things, properly classifying our assumptions as either beliefs or fact-based knowledge, this is essential to discerning the real world from the world stage. And I think this is how we navigate our way out. We have to be honest enough to know when something is feelings or fact-based, whether it's true or something we wish to be true. Is it objective or subjective? And we have a lot of examples, especially if you've ever looked into the fakery of outer space. For example, many people will claim that they know the Earth's curve because they see boats going over the horizon. Well, they don't. The limits of human vision create this optical illusion. If this were not so, telescopic lenses wouldn't return objects back over that curve, which isn't what's happening. They're simply separating objects that are far away, where the human eye sees them as merged. And that's just an angular resolution issue. It's not a curvature issue. But my point is, their claim that they've seen boats go over the horizon, therefore the Earth is a ball, is based on a naked eye observation. That conclusion is refutable by facts. Therefore, they're asserting something that they can't know, they don't know. And this gets into the question of, again, honesty and self-deception. And do you give people a pass for lying along to get along? Is it rude to call people liars? Well, you know what? The moon rocks are made out of petrified wood. This is a fact. You can laugh at me for not believing that they landed on the moon based on this. But again, I think the burden of proof has been effectively shifted, especially with a lot of these very big and eminently debunkable events. But, people assert things out of indoctrination. They have trust in institutions, and this replaces direct perception. It replaces observational data. And this false sense of knowing, I think this is really the key here. This false sense of knowing the answers kills off curiosity. Oh, we already know all that. There's no reason to look anymore. And look, this false knowledge, this is the stuff the Psywar is made out of. And I refer to this whole place as I call it the lie world order, because what they've done is they've created a system of the ignorant at the base with the knowers at the top, the perpetrators, the operators behind the Psywar, the men behind the curtain. They know what's going on, the people at the bottom don't. And they maintain this distinction. And this is the main distinction, I think, between the elite and the masses. But the masses who go along with the elite become the elite by extension. They are the weapon of the elite. And the unity of 2020 suggests that we've already accepted a new religious paradigm. They've already completed this unification of all mankind. And they've divided the world into unsaved and the saved. And when I say that they've accomplished a universal religion, I mean they've accomplished it even if half the people say they don't want to go along with it. The anti-vaxxers are part of it. And this is how they trap everyone. Both the saved, the vaccinated, and the unsaved, the anti-vaxxers, they're all taking positions in the control dialectic. That's the perpetual Psywar. And the only way to exit this is to avoid not only their polarized opposites, but also the perceived safe spot in the center. Now, my final point, this World War Infinite thing, it never ends. This great reset, it's just putting a new paint job on the old order. And this is the defining and dominant form of government. And we see it in all the movies like Truman Show or The Village, where you're looking at a small group managing the minds of the masses through institutionalized ignorance, fears that are implanted, superstitions that they're programmed with. They're drilled on these things. In the movie The Village, the children have to hide in the basements while the monsters run around trying to open the doors, which is terrifying because they believe in the monsters that keep them in the small village. Well, it's just like the school shooting drills. But the elite made a decision that it's this noble lie concept where they're lying for the greater good. But that's my final point, is that this thing doesn't end in that sense, because this is how they govern the masses quite effectively. And there are some outliers. Most of you are what I consider to be outliers to this. And we all know how we arrived at our particular vantage points. There's the moment you pulled your head out of the box, the moment you take back control over your own perceptions when you realize you've been lied to. And I'm saying that there's lots of us. There are lots of people who know enough to not trust it, but may not have all the answers. And we're the ones who are aggregating all this information, putting all the glitches together. We're the ones who are basically offering the only truth out there outside of their, because their controlled opposition has always been nothing but damage control. If there's any damage, it's really coming from us. And by us, I mean the networked individuals, because they've always been bad. Their props have always been bad. Their crisis actors have always been terrible, but there's never been this many people talking about it or networked at this, until recently. Okay, I'm going through some comments. Pete Shea says, curiosity revitalized the penguin. Yep, joined by, see here, Clockwork 113. Thanks for joining, Sledge. And look, if you want a wrench, just comment and I'll hand one out here shortly. In about 15 minutes, we're going to be live with Fakeologist. Now, today is May Day. And like I say, they use all kinds of excuses to put their pagan ritual out there. And they'll use their political rallies and otherwise. Well, listen to this. There's this story that I'm looking at here where it says, these rockets are going to kill us, or at least they're going to fall, and there's a 10% chance that one of you will get killed by a rocket. And the cover article has a big red rocket. It says, out of control spacecraft that could become deadly. But what do they say when something's crashing? Mayday. So here we have Mayday. This rocket's going to fall. And if you look at the cover, you look at the thumbnail, it's just a maypole. The rocket looks like a maypole. It even has some wires attached to it. Not a coincidence. It's just what I'm saying here. Joined by Trey Forrester, says, more wrench, please. All right, we'll hand one out here. We've been talking about the 55 code, which is very interesting because there's been this, look, there are some, I think it's internal communication. We all notice, we talk about these things, the obvious numbers, but sometimes there's other things that connect these. A lot of times it's names. But all this year, the number 55 has had some significance to all of these martyr psyops, police killing blacks, and these events being compared to Martin Luther King, Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, Emmett Till. All these names and all these events are all correlating strangely with the number 55. And I think it pertains to, it's been 55 years since Martin Luther King's assassination. And I saw this coming in January. I started noticing this. And then, of course, on the 55th anniversary of the assassination, Trump gets arrested and they have it framed during Holy Week like he's some kind of Christ or a martyr. But my point is, one of the patterns we've been picking up here is that they've been bringing back this martyr story from MLK and bringing back the martyr story of Emmett Till. And it's pretty clever how they do this. And this is why I pay attention. Like, for example, Emmett Till was the 14-year-old who was accused of hitting on Carolyn Dunham, who went full Karen on him and got him lynched by an angry mob. That started the civil rights movement. Well, this Carolyn Dunham just died last week at 88. And okay, so that's one story. Emmett Till starts the civil rights movement, or rather his death causes it. He's like the first martyr for this cause. And his accuser just died. Well, at the same time on the news, I see 55-year-old Jamie Foxx had just died, but then was resuscitated. So here you have this Christ narrative, the death, resurrection. But why Jamie Foxx? Well, the 55 is an obvious tie-in, but he was one of the celebrities who really got behind BLM and helped launch it upon the death of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin's death kicked off Black Lives Matter. So you have two martyrs, Emmett Till, Trayvon Martin, both of them insinuated into the same storyline here with these numbers and these particular characters being put out on the screen. And what I'm seeing here again is tying into Martin Luther King, tying into Rodney King. Even MLK's daughter was at Tyree Nichols' funeral, where they went to Mason Temple, where MLK had his final speech. Like, this is a tangled, it's a web. What they create a web of stories where they all recall other stories. It's a web of lies. But I'm looking at it as why. What should we expect of this? What is with all of these constant references to a martyr? Benton says all devil puppets, correct. Pete Shea says 5-5, 5th of May. I married Isis on the 5th of May, but I did not hang on to her very long, by Bob Dylan. Interesting. Now, someone posted a meme of Michelle Obama drinking wine. And this was a picture that was snapped of her during the burning of Notre Dame. She was on a cruise in Paris. And the insinuation here is that she's watching it fall, watching the tower fall while she's drinking her wine. And it does look like you can see the burning tower in the reflection of her wine glass. But it got me thinking about how that event was one of these events that was completely just saturated with predictive programming. And that whole year, 2019, was a big year for predictive programming. In fact, it preceded and predicted the riots of 2020, if you were reading between the lines. But listen to these headlines. 66 minutes, the frantic race to save Notre Dame. 66 minutes, firefighters crack the chest open, pulling out the crown of thorns, the one worn by Jesus Christ at his crucifixion. So in 2019, on April the 15th, Notre Dame burns, tower falls, but there was about 66 minutes there of a window where the firefighters could go save the crown of thorns. Now I'm pointing out the numbers here. Now at the time, if you were watching it live, YouTube's description of the video had a Wikipedia article linking to 9/11 because their algorithm was triggered and it made the wrong call. And they compared it to 9/11. Now, as the thing is burning, they said there were 3 hives on top. Each hive contained 60,000 bees. So 60, 60, and 60. And they were saved miraculously. Now, again, 60, 60, and 60, 66 minutes. There was a Knights Templar, a guy in a Templar costume on the tower before it fell. The Knights Templar were symbolized by the beehive. And of course, the beehive contains the hexagon, and the hexagram has the 60-degree angles. These are encoded events. But I'm just looking through these, the past, and remembering in 2019, we had the individual with the USA shirt who set himself on fire in front of the White House. And I was like, that's interesting. Then a bus passes by, number 113 on it. And that's when we started looking at 113, America burning. And this is all just preceding, of course, November the 3rd, 2020, and this Kraken thing. But their narrative building, their storytelling is what they're doing. This propaganda matrix tells stories through all forms of platforms, and the entertainment media is there to supplant and bolster the news, to Overton window, to prepare you to accept unbelievable things. We're saturated with science fiction, so we believe in the fake space. And none of the believers in fake space are able to reconcile with how fake it is and how obviously fake it is when you compare it to mainstream movies now. I mean, back when Apollo 11 happened, maybe NASA didn't have a lot of competition. They had an edge. But no, the commercial entertainment is just so far better than government entertainment. We talk about this all the time. The Screen Actors Guild versus the Government Actors Guild. The gags can't act. That's why they're working for the government. Although crisis acting is something of like a status symbol, I think it is the new Hollywood. A lot of these Hollywood types like to get into the act. They like to get into the crisis acting. They love that duper's delight. Let's see here, going through your comments. Again, if you are not familiar with the Fakeologist, I'll put a link below. And I've been very busy on the Fakeologist forums. And I will be answering questions if people have quite like that individual who asked the question, why do we pay attention to this stuff? Well, because the only way to opt out of the Psywar is to see through it. And you can't see through it if you're not looking at it, if you're not paying attention. And here's one other point. It's not stressful and it's not a lot of work. Just paying attention, keeping up with it. It's not cumbersome. In fact, it's the opposite. Think about Occam's razor or any of these heuristic devices. You can dismiss things that don't have evidence. You don't have to believe things, especially things that are terrible to believe. You don't have to go with your emotional responses to tragedies. If anything, it saves time. It saves louche. It really does, and it prevents psychological manipulation. Like I'm really questioning that person's question. Why would you question the value of situational awareness, of seeing through lies? Why would you take a pro apathy position? And I hope I've answered the question, because again, nothing could be more disempowering than not having a clue surrounded by a bunch of clueless sheep, because they don't have the same rational responses to things as we observed in 2020. Buzzabola says, what's your opinion on Dane Wigington's chemtrail documentary, The Dimming? I don't believe in chemtrail theory. And the problem with it is this. They're looking at condensation trails, which do exist. There are condensation trails. This is not really disputable. It's an effect that results from the churning of the atmosphere at a certain altitude at a certain temperature. And I saw some study that said only 18% of planes have condensation trails, and it's really just specific to the climatic conditions. But condensation trails happen. There's an explanation for it. Now, if you're going to say that those condensation trails contain additional chemicals, you still have to prove it, and that hasn't been proven yet. And I also think that chemtrail theory is intentionally put out there to convince right-wingers and centrists to be afraid of the sky and climate change, because the right wing is programmed to reject climate change. Liberals believe in climate change and don't believe in chemtrails. Greta does not care about chemtrails. Yet the right wing says, oh no, climate change is a joke, but I'm scared of chemtrails. Now, what they've done, and this is coming from NASA, NASA recently came out and they said, oh, those condensation trails cause climate change. On the right, the chemtrail believers are like, well, no, chemtrails cause geoengineering. So which is it? Chemicals causing geoengineering or condensation trails causing climate change? These are equally invalid points. These are two parts of a controlled dialectic, climate change versus chemtrails. I'm saying that the truth of it is the climate isn't changing because of man. There is no anthropogenic global warming. Ocean levels are not rising. This quote geoengineering thing doesn't add up, other than it's just a way to continue to have some kind of angst about the sky, climate angst. My opinion on it, again, is that before you can assert there are chemtrails, you have to prove them. Chemtrail theory hasn't been bunked, therefore I don't have to debunk it. But there's plenty of supporting evidence for the existence of condensation trails. Now, if you want to debunk condensation trails, you have a lot of work in front of you. And what the dodge here is, many chemtrailists will say, okay, well, screw the condensation trails. I'm not referring to commercial airplanes. I'm talking about stratospheric aerosol injections. Well, okay, you can't just change your entire theory when your theory falls apart. Angst G says, wave a pickle at it. Well, many people believe that you can take pickles, vinegar, boiled vinegar, and clear the chemtrails from the sky. That's, again, that's a belief. That's not something that's been tested, or I don't think it's a scientifically held position. If it was, think about how famous you would be if you discovered that you could counter the sky blocking effects of passing planes with vinegar from the ground. But again, to answer the question, chemtrail theory hasn't been proven to be a real thing. And until you can prove chemtrails and debunk condensation trails, there's really no reason to answer to the claims made by chemtrail proponents. Sledge says chemtrails are all straight. Yes. Chemtrails don't curve. Condensation trails don't curve. The word chemtrail is a misnomer. And the condensation trail explanation, again, it is something that can be observed. It's repeatable, it's testable. And the assertion that there's some kind of chemicals doesn't have any factual basis. And if you have any facts to support it, why haven't you sued the airlines? The inaction of the chemtrail believers is astounding. They'll go fly on airplanes to chemtrail conferences. Like, I'm not sure if they really believe it or they're just in it for the clout and the money. But I'm just saying it's this. We're programmed that we have this new world order religion is the old world order religion. And the template is this: make the sheep fear the sky. Make the sheep think the world's going to end. Make the sheep believe there's too many of them. And if they have all these checked, then they're in the program. And you're in the program if you fear the sky, whether it's space junk, climate change, geoengineering, any of the above. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get in touch with Fakeologist. So we're going to go live here shortly with Fakeologist. What you'll want to do is go to infiniteplane.live where the audio feed will continue, but the video is going to temporarily cut off here as I jump streams. Again, we're going to be live with Fakeologist in about 5 minutes.